Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
Michael sat in the courtroom, his heart pounding against his chest like a drum he couldn't silence. The sound of whispered voices filled the air as the judge's gavel hit the block. Court is now in session. Those words echoed in his ears, heavy and final. Willow sat at the defense table, her pale fingers clutching the edge of her seat. She looked fragile, yet there was strength in her eyes, a strength Michael feared he might destroy with what he was about to say. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his conscience screaming. This wasn't supposed to happen. He'd promised her. He'd promised that he would protect her, no matter what. But the truth had clawed its way to the surface, and there was no turning back. Across the room, Nina's expression was unreadable. She sat stiffly beside her attorney, her eyes darting between Michael and Willow. Her lips trembled slightly, though whether from anger or fear, no one could tell. Sonny sat a few rows behind them, his face unreadable but his jaw tight. He had warned Michael about the consequences of playing with the law, about letting secrets fester until they exploded. Now, it was happening right before their eyes. "Mr. Corinthos, please take the stand," the prosecutor said, her tone sharp and cutting through the silence like a blade. Michael rose slowly, adjusting his tie as if that small movement could anchor him to the ground. He felt every eye in the room on him, his mother's worried gaze, Dante's subtle shake of the head, and Willow's silent plea. She didn't say a word, but her eyes spoke volumes. "Don't do this." As he walked to the witness stand, flashes of the past months replayed in his mind. The lies. The half-truths. The choices made in desperation. The courtroom air felt colder as he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. The irony nearly made him laugh. For months, the truth had been his prison. The prosecutor began calmly, almost gently, but Michael knew better. "Mr. Corinthos, how long have you known about the evidence in question regarding your wife's medical case?" The word wife seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. He cleared his throat. "A few months," he answered quietly. "Months?" The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "And yet, you did not come forward until today?" Michael's stomach twisted. "I didn't think it would matter. I thought I was protecting my family." "By lying to the court?" she pressed, stepping closer. "By protecting Willow," he said firmly. His voice cracked slightly on her name. The audience murmured, the tension thickening. Willow's eyes widened, tears brimming as she shook her head slightly. She couldn't believe he was doing this, turning himself into the villain to save her. Nina's attorney leaned in, whispering something, and Nina's lips curled into a faint, satisfied smirk. It wasn't that she wanted Willow to suffer, but part of her felt vindicated. All this time, she had been painted as the villain, the mother who could never do right by her daughter. Now, the truth showed that even Michael had dirty hands. The judge rapped the gavel. "Order in the court." Michael straightened. "Yes, I knew. I knew about the forged documents. I knew about the missing lab report. I knew because I helped cover it up." A collective gasp filled the room. Willow froze, unable to process the words. "Michael," she whispered under her breath, her voice breaking. "No." The prosecutor stepped closer, her tone sharpening. "You're admitting, under oath, that you tampered with legal evidence?" "I didn't tamper," he insisted, his tone desperate. "I just didn't turn it in. I wanted to protect her." "Protect her from what, Mr. Corinthos? The truth?" Michael's jaw tightened. "From losing everything. From losing her family. From losing the life we built." Sonny closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. He'd been here before, too many times, watching someone he loved destroy themselves trying to do the right thing the wrong way. Carly's breath hitched from across the aisle, her eyes darting from Michael to Willow. She wanted to stand up, scream at him to stop, to shut up before he buried them all deeper, but she couldn't move. The prosecutor turned toward Willow. "Mrs. Corinthos, did you know your husband concealed evidence in your case?" Willow shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. No. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Her words trembled, genuine pain etched into every syllable. He was trying to help me. That may be, the prosecutor replied coldly, but the law doesn't excuse lies, even when told in love. The defense attorney stood up quickly. Objection. Counsel is editorializing. Sustained, the judge said, though his tone betrayed his own unease. Michael's thoughts raced. He had done what he thought was right, what any husband would do. But sitting there now, seeing the devastation in Willow's face, he wasn't sure anymore. He'd built his world on loyalty, on protecting his family at all costs, but the cost had just come due. Willow's tears finally broke free. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered across the room when the judge called a brief recess. Her voice cracked with hurt, her whole body trembling. You should have told me, Michael. I couldn't, he said, voice thick. You were sick. You were fighting for your life. I couldn't put more on you. She shook her head. You should have trusted me. We could have faced it together. Michael reached for her hand, but she pulled back. I thought I was protecting you, he said again, his words hollow now. Everything I did, everything, was for you. Nina stood, her arms crossed, watching the exchange like a ghost from another life. There was a flicker of sadness in her eyes, but also something else, understanding. Maybe because she knew what it was like to lose everything you love in the name of protecting it. The courtroom filled again as recess ended. The tension was unbearable. When Michael retook the stand, his voice steadied, as if he'd finally accepted his fate. Yes, he said when the prosecutor resumed questioning. I made a mistake. I lied. I kept things hidden. But I did it for my family. I didn't do it for power or money. I did it because I couldn't stand to lose her. Willow's shoulders shook silently. Her attorney leaned close, whispering that she needed to compose herself, but how could she? The man she loved had just admitted to breaking the law for her. Love and guilt twisted inside her like a knife. The judge's face was unreadable. Mr. Corinthos, do you understand the gravity of your confession? Yes, Your Honor. You realize this could lead to criminal charges? I do. And yet you still stand by your statement? I do, he said again, his voice clear, unwavering. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the prosecutor hesitated, sensing the weight of his conviction. Carly leaned toward Sonny. He's doing it for her, she whispered. Sonny nodded grimly. Yeah. But it might cost him everything. The judge sighed, the sound heavy and tired. This court will recess until tomorrow morning. Mr. Corinthos, you will remain available for further questioning. As the gavel fell, Willow stood slowly, her knees weak. She turned to Michael. You shouldn't have done this, she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. He reached out, brushing his thumb over her trembling hand. I couldn't live with the lie anymore. Not if it meant losing you. But now you might go to prison, she cried softly. I don't care, he said. As long as you know the truth. As long as you're free. Willow covered her face, shaking her head as she broke down. Nina turned away, tears in her eyes she refused to let anyone see. The prosecutor gathered her files quietly, avoiding the eyes of everyone in the room. Outside the courtroom, chaos erupted. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing. Michael Corinthos admits to hiding evidence. How will this affect Willow's trial? One shouted. Will Nina Reeves press charges? Another asked. Sonny placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. You just made your life a lot harder, kid. Michael nodded. Maybe. But I couldn't keep lying. Carly came up beside him, her voice thick with emotion. You think that makes it better? You think the truth fixes everything? No, Michael said softly. But lies never do. Willow emerged moments later, escorted by her attorney. When their eyes met, the room seemed to fade away. She walked up to him slowly. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly, "but I'll never stop loving you." He smiled faintly. "That's enough for me." They stood there for a moment, two broken hearts still bound by love, while the world around them spun in judgment. Later that night, Michael sat alone in his office, staring at the framed photo of their family. The laughter, the smiles, it all felt like a lifetime ago. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "I did the right thing." But in the quiet, even he wasn't sure anymore. Across town, Willow sat on the edge of their bed, clutching one of Wiley's toys, tears falling silently. She understood why he'd done it. She always did. But this time, love had come with a price neither of them were ready to pay. Nina poured herself a glass of wine, staring out the window. She'd won the legal battle, perhaps, but it didn't feel like victory. Watching her daughter in pain had stripped away any satisfaction. Love and truth, she murmured to herself, they always destroy each other. Back at the Corinthos mansion, Carly sat with Sonny, both silent. The night was heavy, filled with the echoes of choices made in the name of love. "You think they'll survive this?" Carly finally asked. Sonny exhaled slowly. "If anyone can, it's them. But it's gonna take more than love this time." Michael looked out the window into the darkness, thinking about Willow, about their family, about the chaos he had unleashed. He didn't regret telling the truth, but he hated that the truth hurt so much. Tomorrow, the trial would continue. Tomorrow, the world would judge him again. But for now, in the silence of his guilt, Michael found something like peace. Because for the first time in a long time, he had stopped running from the truth. Even if it meant losing everything else. The air in the courtroom was thick enough to be sliced with a gavel. Every breath felt like a conscious effort, a negotiation with the heavy stillness that had descended upon the proceedings. The wood-paneled walls seemed to lean in, absorbing the whispers and the rustle of nervous movement, only to amplify the pounding of anxious hearts. At the center of this suffocating arena was Willow Tate, her posture a study in fragile dignity. She sat beside her attorney, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were a bloodless white. The simple, modest dress she wore seemed to amplify her vulnerability, making her appear smaller against the imposing bulk of the defense table. Her future, the very right to raise her son, Wiley, hung in the balance, a delicate mobile threatened by the slightest gust of damning testimony. Across the aisle, the opposing counsel wore an expression of grim satisfaction, a predator that had expertly laid its traps and was now merely waiting for the final spring. The case against Willow was, on paper, a compelling one. It was built on a foundation of perceived instability, of a past marred by illness and secrets, carefully framed as a pattern of unfitness. They had painted a picture of a woman whose very nature was a risk to a child, and with each witness, the brushstrokes had grown darker, more definitive. Willow's gaze, however, kept drifting past the lawyers, past the judge's stoic bench, to a figure sitting a few rows back. Michael Corinthos sat ramrod straight, his jaw set in a line of granite. His eyes, usually so full of fiery conviction, were shadowed with a turmoil he could barely contain. He was a man divided, torn asunder by loyalties that pulled him in opposite directions with the force of tectonic plates. On one side was his mother, Carly, whose fierce, protective love for Wiley was an undeniable force of nature. Her campaign to secure custody of her grandson was born from a place of genuine, if brutally executed, concern. On the other side was Willow, the woman he loved, the woman he had built a life with, the woman whose heart was breaking in real time before his eyes. And binding it all together was the terrible, unspoken truth, a secret he had helped bury, a lie of omission that had festered, poisoning the very roots of their family. The day's testimony had been particularly brutal. A so-called expert witness, meticulously prepped by the opposition, had just finished a clinical dissection of Willow's character, using her battle with leukemia and the emotional fallout as evidence of inherent weakness. The words frailty, unreliability, and high-risk environment echoed in the silent room, hanging in the air like poisonous gas. Willow had flinched at each one, a fresh wound inflicted with sterile, professional precision. Michael watched as she subtly bowed her head, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek before she quickly wiped it away. That tear was the final straw. It was a drop of acid on his soul. His phone, set to silent, had been vibrating incessantly in his pocket. He knew without looking it was his mother. Carly's strategy was clear: maintain the course, let the legal machine do its work, and secure victory. The truth, in her view, was a luxury they could not afford, a bomb that would annihilate everything in its blast radius. But as Michael looked at Willow, at the profound devastation etched on her face, the cost of that victory became untenable. He saw not just the potential loss of her son, but the erosion of her spirit. He was complicit in that erosion. The lie was not just something they were hiding, it was actively being used as a weapon against her, and his silence made him the one holding the hilt. A quiet, almost imperceptible shift occurred within him. The internal battle that had raged for weeks, for months, suddenly stilled. The path forward, though fraught with unimaginable consequences, became the only path he could take. It was no longer a choice between his mother and the woman he loved, it was a choice between a life built on a rotten foundation and the terrifying, necessary act of tearing it all down to build something real. It was a choice between winning the battle and losing the war for his own integrity. The judge called for a brief recess. The gavel cracked, a sound that made everyone jump. As people began to stir, stretching stiff limbs and engaging in hushed, urgent conversations, Michael remained seated for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Willow. She turned slightly, and their eyes met across the crowded room. In her gaze, he saw a desperate, unasked question. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture so small it could have been a trick of the light. But Willow saw it. A flicker of confusion, then a dawning, terrifying comprehension crossed her features. As the bailiff announced the court was back in session and the judge retook the bench, Michael slowly, deliberately, rose to his feet. The movement was so unexpected, so out of order, that a fresh wave of silence crashed over the room. All eyes turned to him. "Your Honor," Michael said, his voice low but clear, cutting through the stillness. It did not carry the confident boom of a Corinthos man issuing a command, but rather the raw, unvarnished tone of a man stepping into an abyss. The judge peered over his glasses, his expression one of mild annoyance at the interruption. "Mr. Corinthos, you are not on the witness list. You will have to take your seat." "I understand, Your Honor," Michael replied, his gaze unwavering. "But I cannot. There is something that needs to be said. A matter of fact that is central to these proceedings. It concerns the welfare of my son, and it concerns the character of the woman you are being asked to judge." He gestured toward Willow, whose face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The opposing lawyer was immediately on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a blatant attempt to disrupt these proceedings with irrelevant theatrics." Michael didn't wait for the judge to rule. "It is relevant," he insisted, his voice gaining a shred of strength, fueled by desperation. "It goes to the very heart of the allegations against Willow. It concerns the secret of her parentage." The word parentage landed in the room like a physical blow. A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the spectators. Willow stared at Michael, her mind reeling. What was he doing? What could he possibly mean? Her parentage? She was the daughter of Harmony. Wasn't she? The judge studied Michael for a long, tense moment. He saw the anguish in the young man's face, the absolute conviction. This was not a stunt. This was a man at his breaking point. "Your Honor, I must strenuously object," the lawyer repeated, his face flushing with anger. "On what grounds, counsel?" the judge asked, his tone weary. "On the grounds of procedure. Of relevance. We have no idea what Mr. Corinthos is about to allege." The judge's eyes shifted back to Michael. "Mr. Corinthos, I am going to allow you to speak. But be advised, you are not under oath. However, anything you say will be noted for the record and may have consequences you cannot foresee. Proceed." Michael nodded, his throat tight. He turned his body slightly, so he was facing Willow directly. It was to her he needed to speak, even if his words were for the entire court. She was the one who needed to hear this. She was the one he had failed. "Willow," he began, his voice cracking on her name. He swallowed hard, forcing the words out. All my life, I've been taught that family is everything. That you protect your own, no matter the cost. I believed that. I lived by that code. And because of that code, I have done something. I have been part of something that I can no longer live with. He took a shaky breath, the sound echoing in the microphone. When we found out about Nina Reeves, when we discovered that she was your biological mother. A gasp, loud and sharp, came from the gallery. Nina Reeves, who had been sitting unobtrusively near the back, frozen in her seat, felt the world drop out from beneath her. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a terrifying, forbidden hope. Michael pressed on, the dam now broken. We found out. Carly and I. We found out months ago. Long before you got sick. Long before any of this. The confession hung in the air, monstrous and incomprehensible. Willow stared at him, her brain refusing to process the words. Months ago? Nina? Her mother? It was impossible. It was a nightmare. She shook her head slowly, a silent, desperate denial. Carly, my mother, she was angry. She felt betrayed by Nina, and she was determined that Nina would not get what she wanted. And what Nina wanted, more than anything, was you. Her daughter. Michael's voice was thick with self-loathing. So, we made a decision. A terrible, unforgivable decision. We decided not to tell you. We decided to keep the truth from you. We lied to you, Willow. Every day, for months, I looked you in the eye and I lied to you. I watched you struggle with your identity, I watched you mourn a mother you never really knew, and I said nothing. I held you while you cried from the pain of your illness, and I knew that your biological mother was out there, desperate to know you, and I kept her from you. I kept you from her. The room was in chaos. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones. Spectators were whispering, their voices a rising hum of shock and speculation. The opposing counsel was shouting objections that were completely drowned out by the tidal wave of Michael's confession. But for Willow, the world had shrunk to the space between her and Michael. The noise faded into a dull roar, a distant ocean against the deafening pounding of her own heart. She felt as if she were falling, tumbling through a void where nothing made sense. The man she loved, the man she trusted with her life, her son's life, had been the architect of a deception so profound it defied understanding. Her illness, her vulnerability, their shared life, it had all been built on a bed of quicksand. Nina is, my mother? The words were a whisper, torn from the deepest part of her, raw and broken. Yes, Michael said, the word a mere exhalation of pain. She is. And I knew. And I didn't tell you. I let this case happen. I let them paint you as unstable, as someone with a fractured history, while I was holding the one piece of information that could have given you context, that could have connected you to a part of yourself you never knew was missing. I was so focused on protecting my mother's vendetta, on winning, that I was willing to let you be destroyed. I told myself it was to protect you, to spare you the pain of knowing Nina was your mother, but that was a lie, too. I was protecting my own guilt. I was protecting the lie. He turned back to the judge, his body trembling with the force of his emotion. Your Honor, you are being asked to rule on Willow's fitness as a mother. How can you possibly do that when the entire premise of this case is tainted? The instability they cite, the secrets, I am the source of the biggest secret of all. I am the one who created an environment of deception. If anyone is unfit, it is me. I have failed her in the most fundamental way a partner can. I have failed my son by teaching him, through my actions, that lies are an acceptable foundation for a family. The fault is not with Willow. The fault is with me. The aftermath of his speech was a vacuum of sound, followed by an explosive cacophony. Nina Reeves was on her feet, tears streaming down her face. A maelstrom of grief and rage and a shocking, overwhelming joy at finally having the truth unleashed, even in this horrific, public crucible. She took a step forward, her eyes locked on Willow, her daughter, who looked as if she had been physically shattered. Willow herself was motionless. The tears were gone, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. She looked at Michael, but she was no longer seeing the man she married. She was seeing a stranger. A strategist. A liar. Every tender moment, every whispered promise, every shared dream for their future, it was all retroactively stained, thrown into question. Had any of it been real? Or had she simply been a pawn in a Corinthos family game, a piece to be moved and manipulated for their own ends? The judge was pounding his gavel, his calls for order barely audible over the din. This court is in recess. I said, this court is in recess. We will reconvene in 1 hour. But the legal proceedings were now a secondary concern. The real drama was unfolding in the well of the courtroom. As people began to file out, some staring with unabashed curiosity, others with pity, Michael moved toward Willow. Willow, please, he begged, his voice ragged. I had to. I couldn't let them do this to you. I couldn't be that person anymore. She flinched away from his outstretched hand as if his touch were fire. Don't, she whispered, the word carrying the weight of a scream. Don't you touch me. Please, let me explain, he pleaded, his own tears finally falling. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But everything I did, even the lying, came from a place of loving you. Of being terrified of losing you. Loving me? A bitter, broken laugh escaped her lips. It was a sound he had never heard from her before, and it chilled him to the bone. You call this love? You let me believe I was alone. You let me go through my cancer treatment thinking my only blood relative was a dead woman who never wanted me, while you knew my mother was alive, desperate to be in my life. You watched me break, Michael. You held the pieces and you never once thought to give me the one thing that could have made me whole. That's not love. That's possession. That's control. She stood up, her legs unsteady, bracing herself on the table. You didn't do this for me, she said, her voice gaining a shred of steel. You did it for yourself. To ease your own conscience. You chose this moment, this public, humiliating spectacle, to clear your own guilty soul. You didn't give me the truth in private, with love and compassion. You detonated it in a courtroom to win a case. You used the truth as your final piece of ammunition. You're no different from them. She gestured vaguely toward the opposing counsel. You just used a different weapon. Her words were more devastating than any ruling the judge could have made. They struck at the core of his justification, exposing the ugly, selfish truth beneath his grand, tragic gesture. He had wanted to be the hero, confessing his sins to save the damsel. But in her eyes, he was just another villain in the story. Before he could form a response, Nina was there, hovering a few feet away, her expression a heartbreaking mix of longing and apprehension. Willow? Nina's voice was soft, tentative, filled with 20-odd years of missed birthdays and lullabies. Willow turned her gaze from Michael to Nina. The woman she had despised, clashed with, judged so harshly. The woman who, she now knew, was her mother. The cognitive dissonance was so violent it was nauseating. All the hatred she had directed at Nina, all the blame she had placed on her for disrupting their lives, now rebounded back onto her, and onto Michael, with crippling force. Nina had been flawed, yes. Reckless, yes. But she had been searching for her child. Michael and Carly had been hiding her. I can't, Willow stammered, backing away from both of them. I can't process this. I can't be here. She turned and fled the courtroom, pushing through the heavy doors into the relative anonymity of the hallway, leaving behind the ruins of her marriage, the shocking revelation of her identity, and the two people who now represented the twin pillars of the most profound betrayal of her life. The fallout was immediate and radioactive. Out in the hallway, Carly Corinthos was waiting, her face a thundercloud of fury. She had heard everything from the gallery. What have you done? She hissed at Michael, grabbing his arm as he emerged, shell-shocked, from the courtroom. You've destroyed us. You've destroyed our family. For what? For her? For Nina? I did what you should have had the courage to do months ago, Mom. Michael shot back, pulling his arm away. I told the truth. This vendetta of yours has gone too far. Look what it cost. Look what we cost Willow. We were protecting Wiley. Carly cried, her eyes blazing. No, Michael said, his voice suddenly quiet and utterly exhausted. We were protecting ourselves. We were playing God with people's lives. And I'm done. I won't be a part of it anymore. Meanwhile, Nina stood alone in the emptying courtroom, a solitary figure amidst the scattered benches. The truth was out. Her daughter knew. But the moment of victory, the moment she had dreamed of for so long, was ashes in her mouth. It had come at the cost of her daughter's utter devastation. She had her truth, but she had lost any chance of a gentle, loving reconciliation. The path to Willow would now be through a minefield of anger and pain. Back in the judge's chambers, the legal teams were in a frantic conference. The case against Willow was in tatters. Michael's confession had not only discredited the entire narrative of secrecy and instability but had also reframed Willow as a victim of a monstrous deception. The unfit environment was not of her making, it was engineered by the very people who were now seeking custody. The judge knew the proceedings had been irrevocably poisoned. When court reconvened an hour later, the atmosphere was entirely different. The bombast was gone, replaced by a weary, somber tension. Willow had returned, escorted by a court officer, her face a pale, closed mask. She did not look at Michael, who had retaken his seat in the gallery, looking hollowed out. She did not look at Nina. She stared straight ahead at the judge. The opposing counsel, his case in ruins, could only muster a weak, procedural argument. Willow's attorney, seizing the moment, argued passionately that the petition for custody was not just flawed, but was built on a fundamental bad faith, a bad faith now exposed by the petitioner's own son. The judge did not need long to deliberate. His ruling was swift and decisive. Given the extraordinary circumstances revealed in these proceedings, the judge intoned, his voice grave, specifically the admission by Mr. Michael Corinthos of a deliberate and prolonged deception perpetrated against the respondent, this court finds that the petition for a change of custody is without merit.